touched down just as the city began to light up. From the window, New York looked like a sea of gold and glass, endless and alive, too bright for anyone who felt empty inside. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching the lights blur, and thought, maybe this trip will finally pull me out of whatever this is. The cab ride from the airport felt longer than it should have. Rain streaked across the windshield, cutting the reflections of skyscrapers into crooked lines. The driver talked about baseball, about his daughter who had just turned 7, but I wasn't really listening. I just nodded when I had to, my eyes glued to the streets that looked both familiar and foreign, like a place I'd dreamed of but never really belonged to. When the taxi stopped in front of the hotel, I hesitated for a second before getting out. The revolving door spun in front of me, swallowing strangers and spitting them out again. I wondered if any of them were as tired as I was, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives under your skin. The lobby smelled like coffee and polished marble. A man in a dark suit greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the Madison, ma'am. Business or pleasure?" I almost laughed. "A bit of both," I said, though we both knew I didn't mean it. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection stared back at me from the golden doors, composed, professional, the kind of woman who's supposed to have her life together. But my eyes gave me away. They always did. When I entered the room, the air conditioning hit me first, too cold, too clean. I turned on a lamp, and warm light spilled across the space, a king-size bed, white sheets, a desk, a bottle of wine left as a welcome gift. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. And somehow, that perfection made it lonelier. I unpacked slowly, more out of habit than need. The sound of my own footsteps filled the silence, echoing off the walls. Then I stopped and walked to the window. The view was breathtaking, buildings stretching toward the clouds, traffic streaming below like veins of light. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, rushing, living. And here I was, standing in a room full of nothing but my own thoughts. I opened the minibar and poured a small glass of wine. It tasted dry, sharp, grounding. I took the first sip like it was medicine. Then I took another. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat by the window, one leg pulled close to my chest, watching the city breathe. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt connected to someone. The last time a conversation felt alive. The last time I'd laughed because I wanted to, not because I was supposed to. But every memory that came up felt faded, like an old photograph left in the sun too long. When I finally stood, it was past midnight. The city outside refused to sleep, and maybe that's what I liked about it. It made me feel less guilty for staying awake. I changed into an oversized shirt, washed my face, and looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a stranger, but she wasn't quite me either. There was something missing, something small but important, like the silence between two notes in a song. Back by the window, I opened the curtain one last time. A man on the street corner was closing his umbrella, laughing with someone unseen. A yellow cab splashed through a puddle. The city felt endless, filled with possibilities I wasn't sure I deserved. I whispered quietly, more to myself than anyone. Maybe this week will change something. Maybe I'll change something. The glass was cold beneath my palm as I touched it. Far below, a siren wailed and faded into the night. And somewhere, behind 100 windows like mine, another pair of eyes looked out at the same skyline, a stranger I hadn't met yet, but who would soon change everything. Morning came too early. The city was already alive when I opened my eyes, sirens, footsteps, the clatter of coffee cups from the cafe below. I showered, tied my hair, put on the navy blazer I didn't even like, and told myself it was just another workday. The conference hall was glass and chrome, loud with people pretending to care about things they didn't. Screens flickered, voices overlapped, and the smell of coffee mixed with expensive perfume. I walked in, smiled when I needed to, nodded at the right moments. It was easy to hide behind routine, I'd been doing it for years. Then I saw him. Ethan. It took me a moment to place the face, sharper jaw, a few new lines near his eyes, but the same calm in the way he carried himself. He'd worked with me years ago, on a project that nearly fell apart. Back then, he was the one who stayed up late fixing things no one else cared about. He'd always been the steady kind, thoughtful, unhurried, the kind of man who didn't talk just to fill silence. And when his eyes found mine across the room, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, more like a quiet breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He smiled. That same half-smile I remembered. The one that always looked like he knew something he shouldn't say out loud. He started walking toward me, and for a second, the noise in the room faded. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "Same," I managed. "Guess New York collects everyone eventually." He laughed softly. "You look exactly the same." I smiled, because that was the kind of lie people tell when they mean you look tired, but not broken. We talked about work, the new team, the deadlines, the city. It should have been nothing. Just polite conversation. But there was an ease between us that I hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't need effort. The kind that makes time slow down. During the lunch break, we ended up at the same table. He bought me coffee without asking, just like he used to. "Still 2 sugars?" he said. I blinked. "You remember that?" "Some things stick," he said, taking a sip of his own. The afternoon dragged on, presentations, small talk, laughter that didn't reach my eyes. But every time I turned my head, I could feel his presence. That quiet gravity between two people who don't have to say much to know there's something there. At one point, while everyone else was laughing at some story, I caught him looking at me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, in a way that made me feel seen. And I realized how long it had been since anyone had really looked at me like that. When the day finally ended, people were exchanging cards, saying goodbyes, heading to dinners and bars. I was gathering my things when I heard his voice behind me. "Hey. You got dinner plans?" I turned. "Not yet." He smiled. "Then let me fix that." I should have said no. But I didn't. Something about the way he said it, quiet, steady, like an invitation that had been waiting years to be spoken, made me forget every reason I'd rehearsed to protect myself. And as we walked out together into the cold New York evening, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: anticipation. The kind that feels like standing on the edge of something beautiful and dangerous at the same time. The restaurant was quiet, tucked between 2 glass towers that reflected the last traces of sunlight. Inside, everything glowed, soft amber light, low music, voices melting into one another like smoke. We sat near the window. The city moved outside, but here it felt like time had slowed down just for us. Ethan ordered wine before I could even look at the menu. "Still red?" he asked. I smiled. "You remember too much." He shrugged. "You forget too easily." For a while, we talked about everything that didn't matter: movies, work, how the city feels like it's running on electricity and caffeine. But beneath the words, something else hummed quietly. It wasn't in what we said, it was in what we didn't. When I left, he looked at me the way people look at things they're afraid to touch, gentle, careful, almost reverent. And I felt that look somewhere deep, like a spark that had been waiting too long for a reason. Halfway through dinner, his hand brushed mine when he reached for the bottle. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Neither did he. For a second, the noise of the city disappeared. It was just the faint sound of a saxophone from the bar and the slow rhythm of my heartbeat trying to keep its pace. He leaned back, his eyes catching the light. "You always do that," he said softly. "Do what?" "Pretend you're not feeling what you're feeling." I didn't have an answer. I just looked at him, and he looked right back, like he already knew. When the check came, I realized I hadn't eaten half my food. He reached for his wallet, but I stopped him. "Let me," I said. He smiled. "You won't win this one." "Maybe I'm not trying to." We walked out together into the chill of the New York night. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered. Cars passed, reflections dancing in every puddle. For a moment, we stood under the hotel awning, both pretending we hadn't noticed how close we were standing. The air between us was different now, charged, deliberate. He said, "You don't have to come in." I answered, "I know." But I didn't move. And neither did he. The city around us blurred, voices, headlights, footsteps. Then his hand found mine. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an answer either. It was something in between, quiet, certain. When the elevator doors closed, I didn't think about right or wrong. All I knew was that, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel empty. The night air was cool when we stepped outside. The city stretched out beneath us, endless lights, restless noise, windows glowing like quiet stories being told behind glass. Somewhere far below, a siren echoed, fading into the hum of traffic. Ethan leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, the wind catching in his hair. I stood beside him, watching the skyline. Neither of us said anything for a while. "You ever feel like you belong somewhere else?" he asked finally. I smiled faintly. "All the time." He nodded, eyes still on the city. "That's what this place does. Makes you wonder what version of yourself you'd be if you weren't so afraid to start over." For a moment, I didn't breathe. Because he wasn't just talking about the city. The lights flickered across his face, gold, then blue, then gold again, and I thought how strange it was that a city so loud could make the silence between two people feel deafening. When I turned to say something, his gaze met mine, steady and unguarded. No question. No hesitation. Just the truth sitting quietly in the space between us. He stepped closer, slow enough to give me time to move away if I wanted to. I didn't. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything, the wind, the distant horns, even the music from the rooftop bar below. I could smell his cologne, faint and warm, and I felt that invisible pull tighten between us. "This shouldn't feel this easy," I whispered. "It never does," he said. And then there was no more distance to close. The city went on living below, lights shifting, voices rising, cars weaving through rain-slick streets, but up there, the world had gone still. No one saw. No one needed to. What happened next didn't belong to words or logic. It was the moment before the fall, the breath before the storm, when two people stopped pretending they were fine. Morning came slowly, pale light spilling through the curtains, soft and cold, like the city itself was holding its breath. The sound of New York waking up drifted in through the half-open window, car horns, footsteps, the low hum of a world that hadn't stopped for what happened the night before. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the skyline outside. My body was still, but my thoughts moved too fast to catch. Everything felt heavier, the air, the sheets, even my heartbeat. Ethan was still asleep. His jacket hung on the chair, his watch on the nightstand, one sleeve of his shirt half folded. The kind of details that mean nothing on any other morning, but today, they meant everything. I got up quietly and walked to the window. The city was bright now, cruelly normal. People were buying coffee, rushing to work, living their same old mornings, while mine had already changed shape. There wasn't regret exactly, not yet. Just silence. The kind that comes after too much honesty. Behind me, I heard him stir. The bedsheets shifted. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to explain. When I finally turned around, he was looking at me, not smiling, not asking, just seeing. He said softly, "You don't owe me anything." "I know," I whispered. "But I think I still do." He nodded once, almost like goodbye, though we were still in the same room. The city outside kept moving. And I realized how strange it is, how a single night can fit inside an entire lifetime, and still feel too big to carry. The flight home felt longer than it should have. I stared at the clouds outside the window until they blurred into one endless sheet of white. The hum of the engines was steady, almost hypnotic, but no matter how high we flew, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished behind. Ethan hadn't said much that morning. Neither had I. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promise, no explanation. Just two people who had crossed a line they'd both drawn for years, and now stood on the other side, pretending they still knew how to breathe. He'd left me a note before I checked out. Just one line, written in small, careful handwriting. Some things aren't meant to be understood, only remembered. I folded it once, twice, and slid it into the pocket of my coat, even though I knew I'd never read it again. The plane began its slow descent, and my reflection flickered faintly in the window, tired eyes, lipstick faded, a woman trying to look composed. But there was something else too. A quiet awareness. The kind that doesn't fade. When I landed, the familiar scent of the airport hit me, coffee, perfume, the rush of strangers walking too fast. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. The car ride home was silent. I kept my eyes on the passing buildings, the streetlights blinking in and out of sight. I thought about the ordinary things waiting for me, work emails, laundry, an empty kitchen, messages from people who'd never notice what had changed. That night, I unpacked my suitcase slowly. Each object felt heavier than it should have: clothes, papers, the hotel key card I hadn't returned. I found myself holding it longer than I meant to, running my thumb across the small golden numbers printed on it. The city outside my window was quiet. Not New York, smaller, duller, almost too still. And for the first time, the silence didn't comfort me. It pressed in, reminding me of everything that had happened in the spaces between words, between choices. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments. The view from the rooftop. The sound of rain on glass. The look in his eyes when he said nothing at all. It wasn't love. It wasn't even longing. It was something harder to name, the echo of a version of me that had existed only for one night, in one place, with someone who didn't ask for forever. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. The hardest part of crossing a line isn't what happens when you do. It's knowing you'll spend the rest of your life pretending you didn't. Days passed quietly, almost too quietly. I buried myself in work, in the comfort of emails, spreadsheets, and meetings that meant nothing but filled the hours. It's strange how easy it is to hide behind the noise of productivity, to look busy enough that no one ever asks if you're okay. Every morning felt the same. Coffee, deadlines, polite smiles. But underneath it all, there was that faint hum, like the echo of a song I couldn't turn off. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was memory. Memory pretending to be silence. One evening, after a long day at the office, I got home and dropped my bag by the door. The apartment was dark except for the city lights spilling in through the blinds. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and turned on my phone. There it was. A message. Ethan. My heart stuttered, that half-second of hesitation before the world starts spinning again. I stared at his name like it might disappear if I blinked too hard. It was short. Just a few words. I keep thinking about that night. That's all. No greeting, no goodbye. No questions, no apology. Just that, raw and unpolished. I set the phone down, but my fingers stayed resting on it, as if waiting for more. Nothing came. For a moment, the apartment felt smaller. The air heavier. I walked to the window and looked out. The skyline was alive, cars slicing through the dark, people moving like tiny sparks. Somewhere out there, he was living his own version of this same silence. And somehow, that made it worse. I thought about answering. I even started typing. We shouldn't talk. Deleted it. I miss it too. Deleted that, too. The truth was simple, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I wanted to go back to the moment before the line, when everything still felt fixable. But I also wanted that feeling again, the one that made me remember I was still alive. I left the message unread, though I'd already memorized every word. The phone buzzed once more, a work notification, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. The world was still moving. My life was still the same. And yet, nothing inside me was where I'd left it. That night, I went to bed with the phone beside me, screen turned face down, the message burning quietly in my mind. I didn't answer him. But I also didn't delete it. The message stayed unread for 3 days. Or at least that's what I told myself, as if refusing to open it could somehow keep it from meaning anything. But I'd memorized the words the first time I saw them. I keep thinking about that night. They echoed every time the city went quiet. On the 4th evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I knew. I froze for a moment, staring at the screen, heart caught somewhere between dread and something softer. Then I answered. "Hey," he said. Just one word, simple, familiar, heavy. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear the sound of his breathing through the static. It felt like standing on the edge of a memory that hadn't faded yet. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up," he finally said. "I almost didn't. But you did." His voice was calm, quieter than I remembered. The kind of voice people use when they're afraid of saying too much. "I wasn't planning to text you," he said. I keep replaying everything. That night. What we said. What we didn't. I closed my eyes. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. "It doesn't change anything," I whispered. "I know." "Then why call?" He paused. "Because not saying anything changes me more." The silence that followed was thick, not uncomfortable, just full of everything we couldn't put into words. I could almost picture him, sitting somewhere dimly lit, maybe on his balcony, city lights flickering across his face. I wondered if he was holding the phone the same way I was, like it was both an anchor and a reminder. "I thought about writing you," he said. "But there's no version of that letter that wouldn't sound like regret." "And is it?" I asked. "Regret?" He breathed out slowly. "No. Not that word. Just, something that doesn't fit in language." The honesty in his tone made my throat tighten. I wanted to say something to make it easier, but the truth doesn't like comfort, it likes silence. "Ethan," I said finally, "we can't keep doing this." "I know," he said again. "But I needed to hear your voice once more before I stopped trying to." That line broke something quiet inside me. Neither of us said goodbye. We just let the silence stretch until the connection faded and the call ended itself. I stared at the black screen, still hearing his voice in the echo of my own breathing. And in that stillness, I realized. Some stories don't end when people stop talking. They end when the silence finally becomes too heavy to carry. I didn't sleep that night. The phone call kept replaying in my mind, every pause, every breath, every word that carried more meaning than it should have. It wasn't just the things he said. It was the things he didn't. By morning, the light outside was pale and uncertain. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, a half-finished cup of coffee beside me. The world felt still, like it was waiting for me to decide something. On the counter, my notebook lay open, pages full of notes, reminders, fragments of thoughts I'd written and never finished. I turned to a clean page and just stared at it for a while. And then, without planning to, I began to write. "Ethan, I don't know why I'm doing this. Maybe because silence feels louder now than it used to. Maybe because I owe this to myself more than to you. I keep telling myself that night was a mistake, but that's not true. A mistake is something you trip into. What we did was a choice. And choices have weight. That night didn't break me. It didn't save me either. It just reminded me how fragile people are when they start to feel again. You said some things aren't meant to be understood, only remembered. Maybe this is one of them. But I think there's something else too, something we never said. Sometimes people come into your life not to stay, but to wake you up. You did that. And I'll always carry the echo of it. But I can't keep living in the space between who I was and who I became that night. So this isn't a goodbye. It's an ending. And endings are just the quiet truth that we survived something that mattered. Her name. When I finished, I didn't reread it. I folded the page carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it shut, even though I knew I'd never send it. It wasn't for him. It was for me. I placed the letter inside a drawer and closed it. The sound of the wood clicking shut felt final, the kind of small sound that somehow fills an entire room. Then I stood there for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, breathing slower than I had in days. For the first time since New York, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. One of those days that feel like they could dissolve into the rest of the week and no one would notice. I was running late, clutching a coffee, scrolling through messages, when I looked up, and froze. He was there. Ethan. Across the street, standing in line at a small cafe I used to love before everything changed. The same calm posture, the same way he looked at the world as if he was always half a thought ahead of everyone else. Time didn't rush forward or backward, it just paused. He hadn't seen me yet. And for a moment, I wondered if I should walk away, let the city swallow the distance between us like it always does. But I didn't move. When he finally looked up, our eyes met. No shock. No smile. Just recognition, quiet, deep, human. The kind that doesn't need words to say, I remember. He walked over. Hey, he said softly. Hi. It was strange, hearing my own voice. It sounded steadier than I felt. You still take your coffee the same way? I laughed under my breath. You still remember? He smiled. Some things stick. We talked for a few minutes, about work, travel, the weather. Small talk, careful talk. But underneath it, there was something peaceful. No more electricity, no more weight. Just two people standing in the space where something once lived. He looked older. Maybe I did too. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. When he glanced at his watch, I understood. I should go, he said. Of course. We didn't hug. We didn't linger. Just one last shared look, not longing, not regret. Something gentler. Gratitude, maybe. Before he turned to leave, he said quietly, "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. And it was true. As he walked away, blending back into the rhythm of the street, I didn't feel the need to turn around. New York had been a beginning, not a story I was meant to keep. The city kept moving, taxis honking, strangers laughing, the sun cutting between the buildings. And somewhere between all that noise, I felt a strange kind of peace, the kind that only comes after you've made peace with your own mistakes. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city outside melting into shades of gold and blue. The world was quiet, not empty, not loud, just balanced. It had been months since I'd seen Ethan, but that meeting stayed with me in a way that didn't ache anymore. It felt like closing a book I'd once loved, still grateful for every page. I reached into the drawer, the one where I'd hidden his note and my unsent letter. The paper had softened with time, the ink fading slightly at the edges. I unfolded it and read the words again. Some things aren't meant to be understood, only remembered. This time I smiled. Because I finally did understand. It wasn't about him. It never really was. It was about the version of me who had forgotten how to feel, and the one who dared to remember, even if it cost her something she couldn't name. I thought about that night in New York, not as a sin, not as a secret, but as a moment suspended between two lives. One where I was asleep. And one where I woke up. I used to believe that mistakes defined us. Now I know, it's what we learn from them that does. The clock ticked softly behind me, the kind of sound that marks time not by minutes, but by peace returning. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle, steady, like the world exhaling. I opened the window just a little, letting the cool air brush against my face. It smelled like rain and asphalt and second chances. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wish to be somewhere else. I didn't wish to be someone else. I just sat there, breathing, grateful. Because every version of me, the one who left, the one who fell, the one who forgave, they'd all led me here. To quiet. To truth. To myself. If you've ever done something you swore you never would, you'll understand. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It starts quietly, in the spaces between who you are and who you used to be. And by the time you realize you've crossed the line, it's already behind you. I used to call it a mistake. Now, I think it was a mirror. Because that night didn't show me who he was, it showed me who I'd become. I wasn't searching for love. I was searching for proof that I could still feel it. And in the middle of a city that never sleeps, I did. Briefly. Intensely. Completely. But every fire burns out, no matter how bright it starts. And when it does, you're left in the quiet, with your choices, your truth, and the reflection of yourself you can't look away from. I don't hate what happened. I don't glorify it either. It was just a moment, the kind that changes you because it reminds you that you're human. Ethan became a memory I don't run from anymore. He was never the point. The point was me, finding the courage to face my own emptiness and finally stop pretending it wasn't there. If I could speak to the woman I was before New York, I'd tell her this. You will make choices that scare you. You will lose things you thought you'd keep. But you will learn, painfully, beautifully, that even mistakes can lead you home. And maybe that's what confession really is. Not asking for forgiveness. Just telling the truth. And letting it set you free.